Hey, what's up guys? My name is Cherno. Welcome back to another code review. For those of you who are new to this series, it's basically a series where I take a look at the code that you guys send me and I review it. This is still one of those like raw series where I just haven't really decided what direction to take this in, just because a code review is such a general thing. In a way, it's kind of difficult to put it into the format of a video because a code review in real life as a software engineer could take hours and is very boring. So it's called the code review series, but really it's the Cherno just talks about code series. Anyway, today I thought that what we would do is kind of simplify this thing. So far we've looked at basically two little game engines, you could say. We've had the 2D game engine made by like a 13-year-old and then the kind of step up to the 17-year-old, and today we've got a 19-year-old, so we're building. I can only go older and older with each episode. But today we have a 19-year-old computer science student who has just made a little Pong clone. So, you know, the arcade game Pong. He's made this for Windows with the objective being making everything from scratch. So this is interesting because I think that this is actually like a manageable size C++ project that you guys could try and implement. If you're following along with my C++ series, then that's great. You're learning all about C++ and you probably want some kind of project to tackle. But if you go to my game engine series, a game engine is quite a large project. It's probably something I'm going to be working on like for the rest of my life. So clearly it might be a little bit of a step up. This, on the other hand, is something that is realistic to actually kind of finish. So I'm excited to dive into this as something that potentially you guys could take a look at yourselves. And hopefully this and what we look at today will help you out if you're in that boat. But first, I want to mention that this video is sponsored by Skillshare. For those of you who still have somehow not heard of Skillshare, even though they've been an amazing sponsor for this channel this entire year, Skillshare is an amazing online learning community where millions of creative and curious people from all around the world come together to learn new skills. It's the perfect platform to pick up a new skill, especially if you find that you're short of time and you want just bite-sized, concise lessons that you can follow along and learn something rapidly. I love the fact that Skillshare has an incredible selection of really well put together classes on pretty much any topic you could think of. Anything from illustration to video production to photography to editing photos to business and marketing and productivity and art. Lots and lots of art. They've got you covered no matter what you are interested in. And coming in at just under $10 a month for an annual subscription, it's really easy to dive in and get started. But it's even easier because for a limited time, Skillshare is giving you guys free Skillshare Premium. All you have to do is click the link in the description below of this video and sign up. So definitely put that downtime to good use and try out Skillshare for free using the link in the description below. Thank you again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video and all the other videos this year. It's been a very Skillshare year. All right, so without further ado, let's dive in and take a look at this little small Pong game. So here is the GitHub repository. If we look through this, it's just a bare bones Pong clone made for Windows from scratch. You can see we have like two paddles, a very blurry looking ball, and it uses CMake, right? So all we have to do is clone this, obviously. I'm gonna find a directory and just type in git clone. There we go. I didn't actually check to see if it had any sub-modules or anything like that, but I guess we'll find out soon enough. Over here inside the directory, I'll make a build directory and then just run CMake to build the project files. Okay, and once we are done with that, let's go ahead and open the solution file and we can see what is up. First thing I like to do is just give this a quick build. So Control-Shift-B to build the entire solution. We'll wait for this to compile, make sure it does compile, step 1. Okay, and then I will set the startup project to be Le Pong, and we can take a look at presumably the main file. Let's just run this code, see if everything works properly first. Okay, so there we go, we've got Pong. Not sure if we read the instructions. Spacebar seems to start, and then we have up and down arrow keys for the right paddle, and then W and S keys for the left paddle. Okay, cool. So there we go. That looks like Pong to me. I guess it works pretty well. Let's try and deliberately lose here. And it resets. Okay, pretty cool. So I noticed the window's not resizable, which is unfortunate. But that's pretty much as simple as you can get. I also am not a huge fan of this blurry light bulb thing. I don't know how this is rendered. Maybe it's a texture, maybe it's some fancy shader or something. I'm not sure. Let's take a look at the code. Okay, so we have a main function. We have a main file that's really clean. I really like this. I love looking at a main file and it's not just cluttered with a bunch of code. This person has not written their code all in one file, which is fantastic. That in itself is a really good setup for a larger project. Pong could easily be written in one file. I probably wouldn't have too much of an issue with it, but it's obviously nice to see something like that. Let's naturally follow this to maybe this header file, and then we'll take a look at this macro and some other things as well. Okay. So in general, this code looks great. Using some kind of documentation here, that's even like a return kind of keyword. I imagine if you hover your mouse over this, you can see that Visual Studio will pick up, I guess, this syntax, and you can see that like there's a special return thing and it returns this text. And so in other words, the documentation has been done really well. There's all of this no except stuff, which, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of just exceptions and the fact that because of exceptions and there's, you know, like no discard and there's all these attributes surrounding C++ and in general, even, you know, trying to write a fully correct C++ data structure these days in 2020, it's just littered with so many keywords and so many extra compiler like directives, I guess, and other things. And it's just, I don't know, I feel like C++ is getting a little bit messy, let's be honest. But anyway, nonetheless, they're here, that's fine. Looks really clean. I like the names, the use of namespaces here and the documentation, as I mentioned. Everything looks really good, and this looks really clean, which is great. So a really good start so far. Let's take a look at this macro and see what it does. Okay, so this macro goes over here, and we have this kind of if condition, then, oh, well, this does assert or return. Assert or return with a condition, and then the value. So this will return the value. So it runs the condition, and if the condition fails, it returns a value. So in other words, this will cause the main function to return -1 if init fails. I'm not gonna lie, that took me like a minute to work out. Otherwise, there's also this assert or log function, which I guess if the condition is false, the condition itself is the thing that you run. That's why there's a semicolon here. Otherwise, it will log the message that you want. So interesting little assertion macros. I mean, they don't really like, they're assertions, but they don't break the debugger on a particular line, which is personally something that I like, and I think in general that's what assertion macros do. So this is definitely interesting. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this before. This kind of assert or return situation. I mean, I probably would have just separated this out into like some kind of assert macro maybe that would run this. But see, the other problem with this is that to me an assertion macro implies that it's a debug only thing, right? If you start wrapping your assertion macros, if you start wrapping important code in assertion macros, to me that says that potentially in release mode that gets nuked, right? Because an assert is really like a debug thing. You can have obviously release mode asserts and like verify, or like there's a bunch of other like I guess I was gonna say stereotypes, conventions, you know, that software developers use. But yeah, so in general, not a huge fan of this, you know. Init returns a boolean, right? So I would have just done something like bool, you know, init or something like that equals that, and then if not init, or you know, if error, or, you know, you can call this whatever you like, then maybe assert and return -1. That to me just makes a lot more sense than wrapping all of that kind of in a macro. But, you know, to each their own. Okay, so what does initializing this game do, right? So we have a static here. That we initialize here. We have game lifetimes. Okay, wow, this code is really nicely written. And I mean, like, my style isn't to you know, have like a little comment here. This person did mention they're a computer science student. I can see that. I feel like this is like the thing that they teach you in computer science. I mean, you know, it's kind of like one of those things where like clean up game systems cleans up the game's systems. Really? You know, this is one of those things that like the code is self-documenting to a point, right? Init game systems, initialize game systems, cleans up games. This is just noise at this point, you know? None of these comments need to exist. This makes perfect sense. And I think that, you know, outside of like a university assignment, which I don't know if this is or not, but outside of that, it's just not necessary to have anything like this because the code is self-documenting. This is interesting though. So we have a static constant expression lifetime, right? Which is a class holding the init and cleanup functions of any item, which have these kind of function pointers, right? So this is a void function that returns a boolean. This is a void function that returns did I say a void function returns a boolean? I meant a function with no parameters that returns a boolean, and this is the same thing, but a void function. You can pass these two in, and then I'm assuming it gets added into some list, which is really interesting. So I've seen this kind of pattern. I don't know what it's called. I never know what these things are called, but basically what this ends up looking like is a little array of pairs of, you know, like construct, destruct, construct, destruct, construct, destruct, right? So I think you might know where I'm going with this. This is the great thing about RAII, so resource acquisition is initialization. I don't really like that saying, but the point is, this is what objects in C++ do. They have a constructor, they have a destructor. I would have probably implemented this with classes instead of having loose functions like this. This is a very C-style way of writing C++ anyway, because you can see that, I mean, I haven't seen a single class yet, which is fine. No, sorry, that's a lie. Lifetime is a class. But you get what I'm trying to say, right? And, you know, having function pointers here, totally fine code. I wouldn't look at this and think that it's not great code or anything. It actually looks kind of advanced to me, to be honest. I wouldn't expect code like this from a first year. I don't know if this person is in their first year, but they are 19. So this is like a good job, I guess, so far. But yeah, some of these things, again, just personal preference. I would probably use like a class because that implicitly has that construction destruction to it, if you really want to tie it to that. But then again, you know, if you look at what Lifetime does, Lifetime has its own kind of init and cleanup function as well that wraps these, and they are constant expressions. So yeah, it's a really interesting way of writing this as well. Anyway, I'm getting a little bit ahead of this, so let's go back to init and see what actually happens. So again, assert or return value, so it returns false if that's false. Interesting, but the problem is this is a nightmare to debug, right? If I want to see what happens, putting a breakpoint here, trying to debug macros, not really nice, right? If you just had something like this, right? If blah, 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 return false, really easy, right? You put a little breakpoint, you can hit like F10. Oh, it's on this line. I guess I'm returning false. Super easy, super nice. So I would take this any day over this, right? So initialize, we try and init items here. And this is what I mean, right? So there's a constant array reference of lifetimes, and those lifetimes contain those function pointers that call init. So we can literally go through all of them and call init, and basically what ends up happening is for these lifetimes, for example, we call the init functions for all of these. And you know, there's probably like a matching pair of that for these shutdown functions, which are our cleanup functions. So that's kind of interesting. Haven't seen that in a while. Same with this, right? We have these init functions, these are our state lifetimes. That's what we're kind of iterating over and calling each of these functions, because these are in fact function pointers, which of course, you know, are these functions, right? And so that we can kind of call them in a way dynamically. It's almost like adding like a registry of startup and shutdown functions. So that's pretty cool, actually. I'm enjoying this code so far. So try init items, obviously that's what that does. If succeeded as false, then they clean up items starting from, I guess, the ones that we got up to. So we basically have this list of things to initialize, and then as soon as we run into an error, we roll that back. So that's kind of interesting. Kind of unnecessary. If succeeded is like, this is a cool pattern for the sake of having it, but for the sake of the game, it's like, well, succeeded, we failed to initialize the window, just shut down the app, like immediately. Who cares about cleaning anything up? We don't need to clean anything up. Operating system will reclaim the memory like that. Would be way better than trying to roll back everything. This is good code though. This is good code though. I'm just talking from more of a practical sense. All right, so this is cool. This is nice. This is one of those things that you would kind of show to a university professor and be like, hey, I know what's up. I know what I'm doing. So this is good. All right. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm not gonna like think about that too much. So far from a systems programming point of view, this is pretty nice code. Okay, what does run do? This is the main game loop. So again, we have that. So a return pattern thing. Running is set to true. It's a static. Okay, cool. On begin run. So this is what actually shows the window, says resizable to false. Log context specifications. So this just logs the OpenGL version and everything. Reset game state. Okay. So this, what is this? Is this a ball.reset? Okay, so you've added reset functions to every object. Okay, I wouldn't do this. What I would do instead is simply recreate those objects, right? So you have a ball in memory, right? What is a ball in memory? Ball in memory is a game object that has a move direction and move speed and position, probably some other stuff, right? That memory is fine. That's your ball. As soon as you wrap up the ball or you want to reset, you clear that ball from memory and you reinitialize it with a fresh ball. That is by far the best way of doing this. Now, if we're talking about massive heap allocations and more complex things, of course, that's not always ideally the way to do this, but the thing is, every time you add a new parameter to your ball or to your game object, you have to add it to that reset function. If you don't, then that's a problem, right? Maybe game object, I haven't looked yet, but maybe your game object or whatever you called it, maybe that has its own reset function that's virtual, and then you call that base function from your override of that function that cleans up ball specific things. It's a little bit of a mess, and it's just really annoying to have to go to that reset function and keep adding variables that need to be reset. And the other question is, what do they get reset to? Maybe the speed should be 1 by default, not 0, right? Because 0 means it doesn't move at all, or something like that, right? That's super annoying as well. So if you just have a ball that gets constructed with a speed of 1, done, right? Just stomp the ball with a fresh ball. And obviously the way that you would do that, if we go here, reset game state, right, is this ball, you know, just ball equals ball, right? And then I don't know if that needs parameters. I don't even know how it gets created in the first place. Let's look at this. Float rate, yeah, actually that's a good point. What creates a ball? Let's quickly try and track down that constructor. Here it is. Oh, it's a static thing, right? So this, you know, just recreate the ball like that. Easy, right? Recreate them with these parameters and you're done. It's also really nice to have it in a particular place. Now, in this case, these are clearly static constant expressions. If they're static constant expressions, why are they in the Pong class? These are clearly, the ball radius is clearly a ball thing. So is ball program, which I assume is a shader program ID, right? This stuff is ball specific, so in a way you could just move it to the ball class, have them be initialized with these variables, and have a default constructor that you can then simply call I keep losing everything, that you can simply call by learn to navigate code, Cherno, by just doing that, right? So that's what I would do instead of having a reset function for every game object, just because that's really annoying to maintain. Okay. Yeah, and in general, don't be afraid to reconstruct objects, right? A little stack allocation like this, walk in the park, right? Not even something to worry about. Same with the paddles, okay? So that's that, playing fault. Okay, let's go back to where were we before this? We were in position paddles on terrain. So again, you know, this sets them, this is like a bit of a reset thing. Where does it go? Oh, it goes at K border offset or whatever. That's const, that's 50. It's always 50, right? Just initialize a paddle at that position maybe. And then that way you can like recreate it, or you can just in general have a function called create paddles that will just always set it to that instead of just having to override these kind of static objects. So that's something that I would have. All right, let's go back to here, and then we get into, okay, we see the random number generator using srand. Wouldn't recommend doing that in, because that's like a very C style way of generating random numbers. The random number generator in C++ is a lot better. I think I'll link a video up there that's me making a game in an hour. That's where I used the C++ random generator if you're interested, because it will get you higher quality random numbers. Believe me, that's a thing. Okay, and that's for future. You know, Pong is going to be fine with srand. It's going to be fine. Okay, that's our onBeginRun function. Then we, you know, this is true, so we go to onUpdate onRender. I love this separation, right? It's good that you don't just have, you know, or actually, I was going to say I love that separation. OnUpdate and render needs to be two distinct things. Whether or not they have to be two distinct functions is up to you. It's fine to have a function called onUpdate that does updating and rendering, as long as you're not kind of doing within one function. You're not doing kind of update ball's position, render ball, update enemy's position, render enemy. You don't want to do that, right? Because that's going to mess you up. You need to update all of your state, process that, and then do the rendering, usually at the end. So it's good to see this kind of separation. Again, it doesn't have to be two functions. In Hazel, we usually have just one onUpdate function that will update everything, and then you can submit stuff to the render queue for rendering and doing other stuff like that. Okay, so on update, we'll get the time delta. Okay, don't like this. I don't like doing this. So we have these constants. So time get happens. Oof. This is a very kind of global approach to this. It's a lot, I think it's a lot easier to understand if inside here you calculate delta and you just pass in the time step, right? Because that way there's no ambiguity to like how it gets calculated and having to like, you know, have this static last time in here and, you know, not really knowing how everything flows. It's just usually just a lot easier to calculate it and then pass it in. And that way, the burden of calling this function never falls on update. I understand that you probably got on update. Yeah, so you've got one on update function for your application and then you call all of these with delta. Maybe call this one with that delta as well. And that way everything's really nicely organized because this is an update function and an update function always has a delta. Just a bit of a code thing. So how do we update the ball? Position plus equals move direction times move speed times delta. Interesting. Now this is fine. I just don't like the idea of delta being in these parentheses because delta is, you should be moving by this is actually what it should be, right? This makes a lot more sense. I'm moving by this amount, but I need to only move this much because that's how much time has passed, right? So it's kind of like you have your move speed calculated in like meters per second, we'll say, and then the times delta is what actually makes it be per second, right? So I don't really like the other way that you wrote it. This is technically makes more sense, right? Update with delta and window size, super weird to take in window size into like an update function. Right, you should definitely have a global way. See, in this case, you should use a global thing, right? You should have a global way to retrieve the window size. You have one window that's never going to change. You're not going to have two Pong windows, and even if you do, you can think of something then, right? You're going to have a global window, so have some kind of static window class or static application class that can get you the window size, right? Taking it into here is a little bit weird. Game object update, so I guess here you're calling the root or the base class, which just does that, which is fine. Collide with terrain. Collides top, collides bottom. So the terrain is just the bounds of the window. And then if it does collide, I would say maybe don't use auto everywhere, by the way. I've noticed this a little bit. And by a little bit, I mean in most places, to be honest, now that I'm looking at it. This is a boolean, right? Just write bool. It's the same amount of characters and it's just so much more readable, right? So definitely do that. Yeah, definitely have bool here. Whether or not this has to be const as well, this is one of those things where you've just got like, and this is as well, this is clearly a float. Just write float, you know, it's not that difficult. If you have these huge class names, I get it, you know. Vector2i, maybe I would write auto instead of that. Not that that's a huge class name, but you know, boolean and float, and keep your primitive types mostly just use them. And again, with this const situation, I don't know. I just feel like this is just so, it just pollutes your code so much. This is going to get you the same result, right? Making this const, not making this const, I don't think it's going to make any difference in code generation, to be honest. If it does, that's super weird to me. So it should be okay. All right. Same with this. Right, like again, it's fine if you feel safer with const and you like that, and it enforces you to make sure that that's something that you're definitely not changing. Leave it, but the auto thing has to go. Okay, so that's collide with terrain. Collide with terrain. Okay, so we were here, yeah. Okay, and that's your paddle update. Okay, in general, pretty good. Now, how long have I been recording for? Good thing I checked, because this camera shuts down after 30 minutes of recording, and I was at like 29 minutes and 11 seconds. Okay, so before we wrap this up, I want to take a quick look at your rendering. In general, though, so far, this is really nice code. It's quite easy to read. It uses some cool advanced things that's great. I think that if someone who is potentially looking to hire you looked through this code, they would be mostly happy. They would be like, oh, cool, this person has demonstrated quite a bit. And also it's just really neat and it's really well organized. And I'm loving that. So this is great. Okay, so make paddle fragment shader. Obviously this is a game, not an engine, so it's fine that this doesn't have like some kind of shader class or renderer class and all of that stuff. It's good to see it like this. It does have a graphics file, which we might look into in a minute, but let's take a look at this, I guess, just because we're naturally here. Make paddle fragment shader. So again, we have like some code here that literally just shades the frag color like this. Here's a little tip. You can remove those extra ones for white. That's fine. And then let's see where that gets called, because I'm actually kind of interested in that. So init paddle programs, this is a paddle program, create paddle program with win size uniform. Very interesting function name. I guess this loads the window size uniform. The provided shaders are then destroyed. That I think that definitely sounds weird, but I'm sure you probably mean the unit, because in OpenGL, when you like create a shader program, you wind up with a program, but the individual shaders can kind of be removed. They're kind of like intermediate files, like .obj files when you're compiling with Visual Studio. You don't really need the intermediate files once you have the exe, once you have the program at the end of the day, but this just sounds funny. All right, cool. So make quad vertex shader, and then obviously this is the function that we're interested in. I noticed that like in a lot of these cases, you're not using header files for like little function declarations. I imagine that's probably because they're just going to be tied to this file. But I will say that having them all over your code like this is not that great. And I don't know if this necessarily would be good if you split it up into multiple files or not, but I don't like scrolling through this code and every now and then seeing like a declaration rather than a definition. I think that's just a little bit messy in an otherwise very clean project. Okay, so create program from shaders. I don't think I want to look at this. It's interesting that you have these GL namespace things. I'm not sure what's going on here. So what is this? So you have your own little wrapper for OpenGL functions. Oh, are you retrieving them yourself? That's the question. Hey, you are. That's kind of cool. I guess you did say from scratch. Okay, well done. So this code is actually loading the required OpenGL functions from the driver instead of actually, using something like GLAD or Glue or any other libraries to do that for you. And then also I'm noticing, obviously, in this GL thing that there's all this pixel format stuff. So we've got Win32 API code that's actually creating the window, so we're not using anything like GLFW. So that's pretty cool. I guess this really is from scratch. It's very Windows. It's Windows only, obviously. And it's going to be hard to bring that out to other platforms. I mean, you'll probably have to rewrite this file per platform, which is why using something like GLFW and GLAD is good, but obviously this is intended to be an exercise. And for that, well done. I don't think I've ever done this before. Definitely, done Win32 API stuff before, but I've never actually loaded my own OpenGL functions just because there's so many of them. I'm likely going to need all of them, and GLAD just does everything for me in the exact same way that I would do it. So basically no reason to do that. But obviously, as an educational point of view, this is cool because you're actually doing everything yourself, which is great. Okay, so that's the whole GL thing. Let's look at the graphics class as well. And again, this is like initializing where loading the DLL file and then dynamically probably, loading all the function pointers to all of those. And this is freeing them in cleanup and create shader from source. Just compiling shader stuff. Actually, one last thing that I might look at is the ball. So how is the ball? It is some cool shader thing. I was so sure it was a texture. That's actually really funny. So there you go, you got a little simple glow. So we've got the norm texture position, which is impossible to see what it is because I don't know where the vertex shader is. Let's try and find that. Make texture to quad vertex shader. And then this is just the texture coordinates. So do not call them texture position. That's no idea what that is. The only reason I suspect it's a vertex, it's a texture coordinate, is because it's in location 1, I guess, and it's an attribute and it's a vec2. In fact, I probably should verify that that's the case. Yeah, it is, right? So these are texture coordinates. So from 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, okay, all that stuff, right? So I would call them texture coordinates for sure. And then don't even get me started on graphics and rendering. So all this stuff, so we have the ×2 - 1, right? So this ×2 - 1, this is interesting. So this basically maps our texture coordinates into a -1 to 1 space instead of 0 to 1. And then we just do a little dot product between the texture position with itself, sure. So square distance to center, this just squares it essentially. And then we do 1 minus square distance to center. So by doing this, what this actually does is makes it so that the middle of the screen is 0, 0. And then, or the middle of the geometry we're drawing, I should say, because that's what has the texture coordinates, is 0, 0. And then the left side is -1, right side is +1. And same with bottom and top respectively. So, and then we have an intensity 1 minus square distance to center, a little bit of a fall off here, some attenuation, and then that's our intensity in all channels, including the alpha channel. So that's kind of cool, cool little glow. And do collide with, don't mind if I do. So this is, yeah, just some collision code, and I expect this is just ABB stuff. Could be a little circle to box collision. I've lost everything as usual. Where's my do collide function? It is, yep. So we have a little radius of the thing, and then we just check the magnitude and see if it's correct. So that's good because the ball is in fact a circle, and we should be using that kind of collision for that. And that's it, yeah. So in general, I don't know what else there is to say. I'm just going to go through everything, make sure that I haven't missed anything huge, but I don't think I have. Cool, we've got a proper timer with query performance counter. That's also nice to see. Yeah. And our window creation function, I'm not going to go over this stuff, but obviously Win32 API code instead of GLW or whatever. And you guys can see that it's like 250 lines of code. It's not a huge deal to create your own window. It's just that, you know, obviously something like GLFW makes it a lot easier for you, and also does all the platform implementations for you, macOS and Linux as well, not just Windows. So in general, that's why people use that, but Windows itself is not particularly difficult to set up. Okay, that's it. So in summary, I enjoyed this code. I think it's written in a very neat way. There are obviously some things that I would change a little bit, and I did mention them, but in general, well done. This is really good. I think that if a recruiter or some kind of person, you know, who is looking to hire you or work with you looked at this code, they would mostly be quite impressed with your code style. And that's great. And also you've obviously shown that you can write stuff from scratch and you're not overly reliant on libraries, which again, from a practical point of view is unnecessary, but from a, you know, look at me, this is what I'm capable of point of view is perfect. So well done. I hope to see much more code like this in the future. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please don't forget to hit the like button. What did you think of this code? Did you disagree with me with anything I said? Would you add any other stuff? Drop it in the comments below. Let's have a nice discussion. Don't forget, if you want to submit your code for a code review, I do have an email address in the description below, chernoreview@gmail.com. Feel free to send me any kind of code that you want me to review. Doesn't have to be C++, doesn't have to be, I haven't looked at anything that's not C++ yet, I realize that, but it doesn't have to be C++, doesn't have to be a game or game related or whatever. I usually just pick the projects based on what I think, how I think they will do for videos and how helpful they will be to the community. Obviously my channel's built around C++ and game related stuff, so that's why I'm picking a lot of this stuff, but I'm not just kind of tied into that. And I mean, there are like hundreds of emails in my inbox, so I might not get to you, but it's always worth a shot to submit it. And if it's really exciting and interesting, then of course I will try my best to take a look at it. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget that you can check out the link in the description below to get your free trial for Skillshare Premium, and I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.